All right, everyone. Thanks for coming in. This is How to Catch a Pen Tester, not with Chris Hansen, actually. Two big differences between To Catch a Predator, the show, and this talk. We're going to be talking about a little bit different predators, ones that maybe, hopefully, you have to deal with a little bit more often. Additionally, I'm not Chris Hansen, but who am I, right? So this is me. I'm Julian. You can call me Hobo as well. I will respond to either. I'm a senior security engineer at a company called Praetorian. We specialize in penetration red team attacks on various companies. So I do a lot of the network pen testing as well as the social engineering aspects for Praetorian. And I've been doing this for a number of years now, right about 2 years. I've been in security for a little bit longer than that. But let's jump into the background. So this is going to be a purple team talk. Really, the idea here is that a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about is my experiences within the past 2 years doing pen tests on a lot of different companies. And I'm going to be mixing that in with the idea of more of the blue team approach to how you might be able to better yourself in what's happening in the future. So if I could actually just get a quick raise your hand if you would consider yourself red team. Yeah? Not very many, actually. Kind of surprised. I thought there would be more red team here. And then blue team, maybe, yeah? Okay, good. So there's a decent mix, and everyone else is just, I don't know. Okay. Perfect. So during this, I'm going to be talking about full stack pen testing. Effectively, that just means that I'm going to be going from the physical side of some of the physical attacks that I've done against companies all the way up to application and everything in between. So the whole concept of this talk is going to be just stories that I'm sharing with you, some really funny stuff that I've seen, bad things, a couple of good things, and then some interesting takes on that, and all with pretty pictures for you guys to look at while I talk. So I want you to know at the end of this how to defeat your pen tester, and if you don't think it's a game, then it is. I treat it like a game whenever I'm working. If I can get access to everything in your network, then I win, and if you stop me from doing so, then you win. And I think it's important to if you are the blue team, if you're trying to defend, and you want to be sure that you're stopping to do a lot of this silly stuff that I'm seeing. That brings me to the inspiration of this. There's a lot of really silly stuff that people do in their networks, and it's so interesting that it happens across almost every network that you go into. Almost every company has the same vulnerabilities in different ways, and I'm sure that you'll be familiar with a couple of the ones that I'll speak about, and I think that some of them might surprise you. And one thing that I want to make sure that you're understanding, though, is that I think that most people believe that they are not vulnerable to this type of whatever I'll talk about, but I will almost guarantee that in some way you are. So maybe just try to think about it in the terms of whatever company that you're working with. How might I be vulnerable to this type of attack? So I've been, like I said, penetration testing for about 2 years. I've been in security for quite a bit longer than that. And it's interesting because I do about 1 week engagements every week. And I have for the past about 2 years. And so that's, I would say an average of about 30-something companies a year. And so just over the past 2 years, that's about 60-something companies. And it's amazing how many of these issues happen between those and how many what I'll continue to call silly things that some of these people are doing. And again, the types of hacks that I'll talk about and the vulnerabilities, these aren't high tech. These aren't super exploit development. And I'd love to give more talks and information about those things as well. But I think we kind of have to start with talking about some of the nastiness before we get into the more technical. So we'll go through it that way. So let's just start at the external side of things. There's really 3 sort of categories that I'd say on a general external level. Phishing, which according to the Verizon data breach report, again this year, is still the highest compromise vector for any company, right? And I'll go through some of the reasons that that's still kind of the case and how difficult it actually is to stop that type of attack. But it's the best because it's remote, it almost always works, and you will inevitably get some kind of credential, some type of remote exploitation command execution on the box. With remote exploitation, sometimes it can be difficult. It can be easy, but you're not necessarily guaranteed, given a specific target, to be able to remotely exploit X service, right? So I consider this, in that aspect, hard, which makes it a little bit less appealing to the masses as phishing might be, but it still is remote, and it's still a great way to get data from the target. As far as physical access goes, that one, actually, I would consider that quite easy. I think that it's an attack vector that's not exploited enough currently. I don't think people protect against this almost at all, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the reason that one's not as good is because it's local. You have to be present there, and a lot of hackers or actual real attackers are theoretically scared of being there in person in the thought that they might get caught, but I think we'll talk a little bit about why that's not necessarily the case as well. So let's look at just a couple of classics. These are just really easy classic examples of these different categories. For phishing, easy credential harvesting, malicious documents to get you remote code exploitation, and then the misconfiguration part. These are all things that I'm actually going to touch on, but in different stories. And the entire goal of this, right, is to get internal network access. Inevitably, that's what you want as an external attacker. You want to have internal access to their network. And as soon as you have that, it's really easy street from there, as we'll get into. So phishing. Phishing is vulnerable pretty much 100% of the time. If I ever had a client that asked to do phishing tests, there was always a finding. There was always at least one person that was vulnerable, no matter what protections they had, no matter what was happening in the environment. And even our own team at Praetorian is vulnerable to this, our own security engineers. We're somewhat a small company, so you would think that of people who are doing phishing campaigns, we are less likely, at least, to be vulnerable to this. But in the specific situation for our company, we designed a phishing campaign around the idea of tech challenges that we were using to recruit people, right? So a lot of companies do this with tech challenges. And we designed a campaign that sent a message and it said, oh, hey, I'm replying and I was going through this tech challenge, but there was actually an issue with my code. I think that I have it right, but could you check this and run it for me? And so our team actually got, our recruiting team, who does do social engineering tests, got this message, and they ran the code without necessarily even thinking twice about it, and then we just had a ping back to the server indicating, oh, this host name, this IP address did run this code. And so anyone's really vulnerable. And that's why technological protections are important, but you can still get around those too. But first, here's just a quick, there's no chance that you're going to be able to read that with the, with the projector currently. But it just says, oh, hello, Julian. So as you might be aware, we're beginning to move to Office 365. It's going to make everything more secure. Nothing's really going to change under the hood. Very simple, very basic text, right? Just saying, hey, we just need you to click this link and verify your account. Unfortunately, if you don't, we're going to have to lock out your account on Friday, and you'll have to get it reset manually. So just click that, enter your credentials, and then you'll be good to go. And this, like I say up there, 33% of the time, it works every time. About a 33% compromise rate of credentials, just using this extremely basic template with a website that looks kind of like the one of the target, right? Typically, you'll just put like someone-secure, and then that's easy enough to fool most people. And obviously, you can get a little bit more complicated with this, but believe it or not, something as easy and simple as this works very drastically often. And then you'll get people who send you messages back, right? They're saying, oh, hello, I've never seen this website before. I just wanted to make sure that it's okay to click on before I do. And so they're asking me that, though, the attacker, so I say, absolutely, of course this is the right thing to click on. And they inevitably click on it and enter their credentials, which is mind-blowing. So, well done, you verified that it's the right thing to do. So, mitigations, though. So it's important to have technological mitigations, or else you're going to run into just rampant password retrieval from the attacker just based on these simple phishing attacks. So things that I recommend to my clients all the time, things like Proofpoint and OpenDNS, a pretty powerful combo as far as, those are just two ones that I think of off the top of my head. Proofpoint will actually hijack the link in the email and sandbox it for you, investigate it. OpenDNS will check and see if the DNS records, if it's something brand new, most likely it's going to be some type of phishing site, and so maybe it's denied on that side. But something that you can do to mitigate both of those things, right? There was a situation where I sent out an email, same attack compromise vector, right, where you saw in the last email, and I get an email back with them saying, oh, hey, here's a screenshot of what happened when I tried to click on that link, and it's Proofpoint, and it's not allowing it to go through, etc. I said, okay, yeah, I think a lot of users have been having that issue. How about you just enter this on your phone and just type it in and then submit it and use your credentials there. That gets around both Proofpoint and OpenDNS because it's not on their network, and it's not being hijacked by Proofpoint because they're just typing it in, right? So that's a perfect way to get around just both of those. And you'll have a lower click-through rate, but you'll still get one person. And then I'm sure all of you know that just at least one compromise is enough for phishing to make it worth it for the attacker. So the reason that guy's there, that is a demonstration of me waiting and mitigating two-factor authorization. Now, two-factor authorization is paramount in ways to protect against these types of things. However, you can always get around it. And in this case, very simple, just sent the same message, and I knew that they had two-factor, so I put a two-factor token box in there as well. Now, obviously, at the time where they submitted it, I was not able to put the two-factor token in immediately because that time doesn't make sense, right? But when I send a second message, I pre-fill all of their information that they sent me the first time, and I just sit there and I wait for them to enter the two-factor token on the second time. And when they submit it again, then you still get access in, even with two-factor enabled. Now, that obviously is a bit of a race condition there, and so in the email you can specify things like, well, it looks like there was an issue with the two-factor token. It looks like you submitted the one after. So if you could submit it immediately upon getting that first one, then we'll be able to get it. We'll be able to get you verified. And that actually works a lot of the time. And of course, I could have done something along the lines of creating a script that would actually post to the login application upon receiving it. But again, we're just doing real easy steps right now because we're not mitigating those quite yet. So defaults, let's go into that category. I think that this is actually a pretty rampant issue that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of. And part of the issue is that people are setting up something and they attach potentially like AD authentication to it, and they just leave it alone. They say, okay, this isn't a problem anymore because we have AD authentication, and they don't even think about the default username or password that was associated with the device prior. So let's talk about just enumeration. And in this case, externally, we're talking about user enumeration. This is classically vulnerable, especially in one particular area of almost all web applications, the forgot my password link, right? People typically, when you're putting in your username and your password, they'll say, this is an invalid username and or password combo. People do that right most of the time. Now, if you do the forgot my password and you enter your user account, it's probably going to say like, we sent you an email to your X whatever account, indicating that it was in fact a true account that exists. Or it'll say, oh, sorry, user not found. No, and then we know for sure that we have user enumeration on that page. And the reason that this is really important for an external perspective is if I can get usernames, then I can probably brute force a couple of passwords, right? If you're in a network environment that doesn't have some permutation of the password spring 2016, or maybe in this case, summer 2016, right? If you're not in that type of environment, then I would be astonished, because that is at least a password in every single environment with these 90-day rotations where people just choose a season. So it's even more especially important whenever you have things like this HTTP basic auth with no account lockout, no throttling on the endpoints. So you can just continuously request passwords and eventually you'll get one. But in this case, I want to talk about unprotected application interfaces. My favorites, JBoss and Tomcat. Love those, love those types of authentications for that, because that will get you remote code execution night and day all the time. People will have that Tomcat manager interface open, and it's just admin admin or Tomcat admin, some permutation of those ideas. And since it's HTTP basic auth, you can just keep trying, and eventually you're going to get it. And there are some that people don't necessarily even realize. There was one that I saw recently, a program called Op Manager from ManageEngine. They have a interesting version of default credentials where it's locked into the application. You can't even change it as an end user. I believe it's the integration user in Ops Engine. And if you have it in there and you have Postgres exposed, then someone can just dump all of the credentials from the Op Manager database, get the administrative user from that, and then take that, log into the application, and steal the WMI authenticator that actually checks with the domain controller to make sure that AD authentication is working. So from there, you just got, from a built-in, unchangeable user, you can get domain administrator by stealing a WMI off of that. And that is in current versions of Op Manager right now. So something to be on the lookout for. Unauthenticated interface. This is kind of the same sort of concept. There was a company I was working for that had just a somewhat harmless directory listing enabled on one of their external interfaces. And there's this Concur service that I clicked on. And it said, oh, you've just started a service on port, I think it was 3003. But, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that service is. It was actually a WSDL for a SOAP interface. And this SOAP interface was completely unauthenticated. So 3 lines of Python later, and you just dump their entire database of whatever they're connecting with SOAP. In this case, credit cards. Cool, external unauthenticated credit card dump. What more could you want? And it's interesting because this really does happen in a lot of situations. I've seen companies protect SMB shares over HTTP with a password, but then they have, on the actual SMB side, it's anonymous authentication to list the shares and folders within that. And you see this over and over again in companies. So once you've gotten into the external side, you have authenticated via some user. Something classic that always tends to happen is arbitrary file upload. And most websites will check to go, oh, okay, well, you're not supposed to upload a PHP. So they say, all right, anything with a PHP on it, drop it. There's so many ways to get around that. No byte injection, just renaming the extensions. The possibilities on that one are almost not limitless, but it's up there. So there's a lot of ways to get around that, and to make sure that you're properly having all of the malicious potential files weeded out is difficult. So that's really all of that external side. I want to talk about the social and physical, which is the final bit of that external chart that I showed you. So I think that I look a little bit more graceful than that when I'm doing my physical pen test, but I'm not quite sure. I think that when doing those, people are expecting that type of person to come through. And I like to think that I look somewhat harmless and no one really cares that I'm in their company, even if it's a company of I've been in buildings as small as about 14 people and just walking through, and they don't seem to actually care. It just look like I'm maybe someone from AT&T or something. So phone calls are some of my favorite vulnerabilities, because our phone system is incredible in the sense that it's one of the only pieces of modern-ish technology that I can think of that has nearly no security implications for it at all. It doesn't secure anything. There's no ensuring that the phone number is the phone number that is calling you is actually that phone number. You don't know who you're talking to on the other end, except for if you can maybe identify the voice with your brain. So it's interesting, and it makes for a really good vulnerability platform. And so there was a client that I had that Fortune 100 manufactures tons of these smart appliances. And we were talking on the phone. They said, well, really, what can you can't do much with a phone call to us. That doesn't really affect us very much. I said, okay, well, do you have one of these smart appliances to the CISO? I said, yes, of course. Okay, well, I'm going to steal that appliance from you over the phone from your help desk. They, okay, yeah, sure, try that. And 3 calls later, and it works. And I had physical possession in terms of the law and warranty under my name for this CISO's appliance, which is pretty incredible. I mean, you can do anything with just a couple of phone calls if you know how to work it correctly. And I think that that's a really powerful thought. If you think that you're not vulnerable to a phone call type of attack, you should be a little creative and think about ways that might actually impact you. Continuing on phone calls, there's really a way to reset anyone's password just by calling up. So I had a client that was a major university, and they tried to set me up for failure for whatever reason. Sometimes companies do that. They want a glowing record to show that the pen test it failed and they were successful. And so they told me that I needed to call the help desk as this 70-year-old lady IT director and try to get her password reset and then get her actual password. And I was kind of thinking, I don't know really how I'm going to do this successfully, especially after they told the help desk that I was going to be calling at some point to get someone's password. But it turns out that in this way, because I was able to use voice modulation, spoof the phone number to something within that area code, they had to conduct normal business throughout the day, and so they weren't expecting that fake phone call to be coming from what sounded like a 70-year-old woman IT person who lost their password. And so I was successful in getting that password and resetting it, but there's always a way, pretty much via phone call, to get anything done. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say on phone calls in general. Now, actually going in and doing physical penetration tests, there are a lot of interesting and fun ways to exploit that idea depending on the type of environment that you're in. One such company had lots of different showrooms that they would exhibit their, let's say, product, in this case, on. And they wanted me to go in and see what I could take from this showroom. Could I steal a computer from them? At first it was a joke. He kind of got cheeky on the kickoff call and said, well, could you just walk out of the room with a computer and just put it in your car? And I said, yeah, let's do that. Absolutely. And so upon trying that, getting there and as soon as I got there, I claimed to be, oh yes, I'm doing a little bit of IT maintenance. I called them the day before saying, hey, I'm going to come by tomorrow. Let me know what time works best for you, and I'm going to just come in and do some updates on this computer. Sure. And then I got there that next day, and the guy says, hey, thanks for being here. Go ahead and have at it. I'm going to go for about 3 hours, and I'll be back. And he left me completely alone with this entire showroom. And the funnier part about that to me is that up there on the top, I was sitting at the desk with the computer, and there was a screen full of cameras, security cameras pointed all around the building to make sure that you could be seeing anyone sneaking about. And so I had complete control over that entire situation. If he was coming back, I could see him coming back, stop rummaging through files and taking pictures, and then carry on with it. And I even waited for him to get back before I said, hey, I am going to need to take this computer outside, and I need to plug it into my my SAT link in my Honda Fit and manually conduct the update from there. And he said, oh yeah, sure, there's nothing weird about that. And so I took the computer I took the computer out and I put it in my very organized Honda Fit And I drove away with it, and I came back about 30 minutes later and just gave it to him and said, yeah, it's all good, we're good to go, and left. But, think about, from an attacker perspective, you could have done anything with that computer. You could have uploaded any number of malware to the computer to track it, or more specifically, plug it in, connect up to the VPN on their internal network, and start just going to town on their internal. And it's just amazing that there's so many different ways that you can take advantage of these types of vulnerabilities. So from an external perspective, these are the things that we just talked about. I think that the physical part is some of the hardest things to protect, which is why it's in red. But there are ways to do it correctly. I have one such company that I work for that really does it the right way. They have 0 clients, which have nothing on them at all. It's just an operating system. When it does a 2-factor login to connect to their domain, it pulls whatever it needs down from the cloud, and then as soon as it shuts off, again, it's just a dumb box with an operating system. So if I go in and steal a computer from them, I'm really just taking hardware at that point, which is more rude than it is useful. So I think those are the good ways to make sure that you're worrying about those physical environments. So let's actually move on to the internal side of things. If you've ever done an internal penetration test, it's easy, right? And it's easy because things are set up currently in the way that they are to where it's very insecure by default, right? The goal of an internal assessment is to become the domain administrator of a network, right? That is to be the most powerful member of the network and have unfederated access to anything that you want. Now, why is there ice cream here? I think this is an appropriate analogy to what this path to full domain administrative access, and it works 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, but it's scary. How many of you guys have heard of broadcast resolution poisoning? Show of hands? Not surprised. There's not that many. It's somewhat uncommon to hear about, but it's probably, in my opinion, one of the most terrifying types of vulnerabilities that exists right now. And it's somewhat unknown for whatever reason. So what effectively that does, and I'll show you a quick graphic of it, but it's kind of, in broad terms, a man-in-the-middle attack that will effectively yield you password hashes out from an internal environment. And this is going to be set up by default on all Windows environments without already having done something to them. This will effectively give the attacker the ability to harvest hashes that they can use to crack online. And we can crack passwords real quick now. So unless you've got at least 16 character minimums and they're fairly robust passwords, then they're going to be cracked, and there's going to be escalation from there. So again, broadcast resolution poisoning to weak passwords because they need to be cracked. And then this idea of local administrative access on boxes. A lot of companies give their end users, administrative rights to the system, which ends up giving the user system-level access. And with system-level access, you can dump clear text credentials from memory using something like Mimikatz. And it dumps like wdigest area credentials from those boxes. So also, there is the built-in local administrator account for each Windows domain. And if you don't have like Microsoft's LAP setup, then people can just take that hash, assuming the pass hash is enabled or they crack the administrative hash, and they can just move that account across each different box until they find a domain administrator who is wrongfully logged on to an unprivileged server. And this happens constantly. And you should try this out on your own environment if you're unfamiliar with this concept, because I can nearly guarantee that if you haven't set up protections against this, then you will be vulnerable to having your entire domain compromised from doing so. So this is just a very quick concept on broadcast resolution poisoning, because I think it's still somewhat unknown to a lot of people. Effectively, the attacker is just identifying itself as a proxy server for you to send across a hash to, and then it will then broadcast out to others saying, oh, are you this server? Yep, that's me. That's me. I'm that server. And they will send their hash out to you to authenticate to. And these are challenge response net NTLM v1 and v2 hashes. And they're not entirely quick to crack like you would say like NTLM, but they're fast enough to crack to where I can pretty much guarantee an 8 password character crack within, say, a day. So it's still not very good for having set up that way. And there are ways to fix it. You can static null route MDNS and WPAD and LLMNR. There's a couple of different broadcast resolution protocols that you need to be aware of in order to make sure that this is mitigated. As far as weak passwords go, I mean, it's really simple. Enhanced password policy. You guys know that we need to be using at least 16 characters, right? If you're in a battle, which I think probably a lot of you are, with trying to change that password policy in your company, I would suggest making the statement of doing 180-day password rotations. That might be a fair trade-off to a lot of people. I think that having 180-day password rotations with 16 characters is more than fair. I would love to see high character length and almost no complexity even, because really the complexity requirements and whatnot that most end users do, they're not being creative with it, right? And sometimes administrators aren't either. If you're replacing the I with a 1, like I know that you're going to do that too, so I'm also going to guess that. And I can guess a lot of different options, and so I'm eventually going to get your password that way. There was one domain administrator that I compromised. Let's say the password in this case was Skittles. It was something close to that, right? But they leadified the word Skittles, and I can guess that too because that's a really simple idea. So you put Skittles in augmentation rule set, pops out leadified. But that worked. That didn't quite work, right? That was an old password that they had that worked on a different environment. So I thought, okay, I guess that means that they've changed it since then. But they probably still use Skittles, I'll bet. And they probably didn't change it too much from whatever it was that they had before leadified Skittles. So if I put leadified Skittles down there and I do everything in the world to it, maybe I'll get their password. Yeah, sure enough, it's just Skittles, Skittles, the same leadified but repeated the password. It's not really clever because if I can think of it, then it's also going to get tried. So you have to come up with something a little bit more creative if you're going to go that way. Chinese characters all the way. For Mimikatz, an important idea here is that there are Microsoft knowledge bases that will stop you from the dumping of clear text credentials. And I think that this is also somewhat unknown. The fact that you can even get clear text credentials out from a computer, it doesn't matter how strong your password is. I'll be able to know what it is if I can dump them and see them in the plain text, right? And you can stop this from happening through some knowledge bases that have come out which create a registry value that will not store these passwords in memory. But it's a toggleable registry value. So if I get system on your box, then I'm going to flip that bit on that registry, and the next time you log in, it will be saved. So a really good idea here would be to monitor that registry value. If it changes, if it becomes, hey, yeah, I actually do store these in memory, then you probably got compromised by something, and you should look into it most definitely. So let's move over to a little bit more blue team side of things. So this is what I like to call the blue team pyramid of needs, and I think that people typically fall short on this pyramid somewhere along the line. The first thing that you need to have an effective blue team is people, right? After that, logging. And people who complain about logging situations like, well, I can't afford logarithm or X, Y, and Z because it's too expensive. Yeah, okay, maybe you don't have the budget for that, but there are really good free tools. Like Graylog is one that comes to mind that's really good, a log aggregator that you can use for any number of things on your network. And then to be able to monitor those logs is another big part. I think a lot of people have the logging bit down, and they just never touch the logs after that, right? Like they just don't even look at them. Yeah, we've got logging so that when a compromise inevitably does happen, they can be, retroactive man and say, we should have done this better before. But if you're actually going through and monitoring those things, maybe you can catch them in the act, right? And then being able to respond is the last part of that, where you're saying, okay, someone's flipped that registry bit in Mimikatz. I saw it because the monitoring person caught it, and then now let's respond to it and actively investigate what's going on there. And all these in tandem are crucially important, and I don't think that it's done in a lot of companies very well. So there are different levels of detecting types of attacks, though, right? First, you have your script kiddies. Yeah, this type of detection, theoretically, very easy, right? For Nmap, if anyone running an Nmap scan, if you don't recompile it or reconfigure it for your own or do your own type of port scan, Nmap will send weird strings like, "Hey, nice ports." Like it'll send that to the machine, and if you have any type of IDS or IPS in place, it should at least say, "Oh, hey, I'm being scanned." And even if it wasn't that, detecting like half scan, half send scan type stuff is somewhat quite easy for any type of IDS to do as well. So consider, if you're on the red team side, making your own port scanner that's customized for that. Vulnerability scanners that script kiddies use, they'll have, like Nessus is a good example of that. When it's testing things on the web, it'll actually use a thing on its user agent string for connecting out is a Nessus user agent. So disable that if you're going to do that. But also if you're on the blue team side, look for that because that means someone's scanning your box with a Nessus agent. And then Metasploit payloads, yeah, everyone's using those. So maybe, I don't care how many times you encode your Meterpreter payload with Chicago Night. You can do it like 1,000, you can do it 6,000 times, and you're still going to get caught by signatures because they detect that type of stuff. And then you get into sort of pro detection, and this is where the blue team part becomes a little bit more tricky. At this level, you kind of have to really have a firm grasp on your network. You need to be able to identify what types of traffic is happening in your network at all times and detect diffs in what's going on, deltas of abnormal traffic coming out from a machine. Really popular choices for exfiltration of data are DNS and HTTPS because there are nearly always no egress protections outbound for those, right? So if you're identifying one box that's sending out quite a bit of HTTPS traffic or DNS traffic, especially if it's on a regular basis, then you probably have a command and control situation going on exfiltrating out from your network. And then file access monitoring, maybe there are some users that don't normally access these types of files, and especially they don't access them within 1/10 of a second. And you won't be able to catch that type of thing unless you're not doing the monitoring and the logging of those things. And then lastly on that, normalizing user activity. So let's say Joe Schmo logs in via SMB about 3 times a day. If that becomes 3,000 times within an hour, you probably have something going on that you need to look into. And people tend to miss a lot of this type of stuff in every environment because they don't have that type of traffic logging going on in their network. And then lastly for that, nation state detection. These guys, it's probably not going to be an issue for you specifically, probably not after you, but if they are, then the idea is that they can go as slow as they want. And that's pretty much their entire end-game purpose, is to go way slow. And that same idea where maybe there's an exfiltration out over HTTPS, there might be a request coming out from making an HTTPS request to different IPs for normal information, except for maybe one bit is different. There's one data bit for them that's being exfiltrated. And they just collect those like once a day or once every week for an extended period of time. That's how they can remain undetected that way. And then through purchasing O-days, it's going to be difficult to actually find the point of compromise. But maybe you'll be able to detect them by this user account login data or the file access. This file is almost never accessed, and it was accessed this one time on this day. It's not easy, but you can do it. And then honeypots. I think that this is a concept that isn't utilized nearly enough currently. The idea that, when configured correctly, this can do really well as far as defending against attackers. Now, if you've got a honeypot set up, and I've seen this before, it's not domain joined, it's got a different weird name to it that says passwords, 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 or something like that, and then there's no activity coming from out of the box or into the box, and every port is open. I'm not going to touch that because that's a really obvious honeypot at that point. But you do have to monitor it, right? If you do have a setup like that, normalize the activity, make it a believable vulnerability, put like 1 or 2 vulns on it that are pretty decently well known, and then you can actually monitor that. If anything's sending traffic to it, then it should be known, okay, someone's trying to attack, shut that connection, check out the source IP address, see what's going on there. And yeah, go big or go home with it. There are a lot of cool implementations that could be done with honeypots that I don't feel like are really done. Maybe there's you're doing fake traffic, let's say, inside of like a honey net. And you're sending out all this fake traffic, but all the traffic from it maybe has a magical byte sequence that identifies it as fake traffic. That might be hard for an attacker to identify or replicate. And if they send traffic out to anything in that honey net, it's not going to have that magic byte sequence, and it can get flagged, and someone can go investigate it. So something to think about for that. Now, this is one of my favorite parts of this, and the last section, really. This is really how I honestly view security most of the time nowadays, right? People will set up protections, and they will just leave it there, and they will say, that is no longer a problem, let's move on. And this is a lot of the time what the end result is. So let's remember that with Active Directory access, the biggest issue is that if you get domain administrator, you have unfederated access, as we mentioned, right? So most of the time, that's it. That just ends whatever the company's doing at that point. But some people do the right thing. They'll implement things like password manager, right? So in this situation, we have a password manager that they put in, and they said, okay, well, we need authentication to this password manager, so we'll just give that authentication to the domain administrators, and they'll be able to log into the password manager and pull down all the passwords they need. Well, that's a terrible idea, because if I already have domain administrator credentials, I'll just log in to the password manager and get even more information in a centralized area, right? And that's why this is displayed like two doors, the same key. It's the exact same situation here, where you have your AD authentication on one side, your password manager is on the other, but you can open them with the same credentials, so what's the purpose? And so I have some clients that say, okay, well, we know how to do that correctly. We'll put a 2-factor authentication on the other password manager door so that doesn't happen. But then you get this type of situation where you then have companies who say, okay, we've got 2-factor on there, so there's no chance of getting in, but they'll not put 2-factor authentication on their 2-factor console. And they'll leave their 2-factor console as AD authentication. So at that point, you just log into the 2-factor console, you either disable 2-factor authorization or get everyone's token, and now you can just log back into the password manager doing that. And some implementations like RSA will just have a little checkbox that says, can this user have a static token? Yes. What is that static token? 111111. And you just log in with that and those credentials, and they literally don't even get a notification that happened. Full compromise of the password manager and Active Directory with no even idea that something has happened. Now, some password managers, like some of my favorites are like CyberArk. I think that they do a pretty good job. They can alert you when very particular files or access is given to certain areas. And so that can be done successfully if you make sure to secure all these in the right way. Another thing, last actual slide here, the intrusion admittance systems, managed service providers, IDS, IPSs that have, again, default credentials that are just spun up. When the box is spun up, it has them on there. And so you can log into these machines, add yourself as an alert figure, say, hey, could you CC me on any suspicious activity that's coming through? And there was one of the guys at my company did that, and he was on their mailing list for activity reports for the next 3 months. And he eventually called up this very popular managed service provider and said, hey, can you take me off of that? I'm not supposed to be here. Just interesting ways to use default credentials again in any situation. So the takeaways for you. Plug-and-play security. It's not a thing. It's not going to be a thing. I don't hopefully think it will ever be a thing, because it stops people from having to actually think about what they're putting up. You don't just get to erase gates and say that this is perfectly good. There's no chance that anyone's going to get through this, and then just walk around. So again, yeah, look at it after you've set it up and make sure, test it, and be creative and think about the edge cases that the attacker might think of. And then please fix the easy stuff, the broadcast resolution poisoning, the passwords, all of that, the default credentials, all of that can be fixed so easily, and it's just not done. And I'd really, just at least for me, so that my job is fun, please do that. And that's really it. I will take any questions if anyone has some. We have about, I think, 10 minutes. No? Anyone? All right. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.